Good morning. So for your math assignment for Friday, September 11th, we are going to continue practicing long division. So you all have a worksheet that was sent over. One of them was for Wednesday, the other one is for today, and it is a worksheet to continue practicing our long division, which we did in our book yesterday on page 13. So you are not going to page 14 yet. You are just going to complete your worksheet and continue practicing the lesson that we did yesterday. If you're having a little bit of trouble with the worksheet, I encourage you to go back to Thursday's YouTube lesson on long division to help you along. So here for our Friday assignment for language arts on page 24, we are continuing to practice our verb forms. So for Think A, you are just going to circle the correct verb form for each sentence. So you're going to read these sentences and then fill in which of the words in the parentheses is the right one that belongs. So for example, it says, the wind had blank for hours. So you'll decide if it makes sense to put the wind had blowed for hours or the wind had blown for hours. So the trick is to read them out loud. When you read them out loud, you can better see if it makes sense. So let's do one more just to practice. It says, how many pictures have you blank? So would you write, how many pictures have you drawn? Or how many pictures have you drawn? And that will be the same method for numbers 3 through 5. For Think B, it says to rewrite each of the following sentences on notebook paper. Change now or often to yesterday and change each action verb in dark type to show that the action took place yesterday. So this sounds a little bit confusing, but I'm going to give you an example. Also, if you write small enough, you don't need to get an extra piece of paper, but it might be easier if you have large handwriting. So let's do number 1 as an example to better understand how to do 1 through 7. So it says for number 1, I see a mockingbird now. So what the directions want you to do is they want you to change this sentence as if it was done yesterday. So if number 1 says, I see a mockingbird now, you would write, I saw a mockingbird yesterday. So every single sentence has to be changed to yesterday. That means every sentence that you write should include the word yesterday. So let's do one more as an example. It says, he does good work now. I would change that to, he did good work yesterday. So for every sentence, you're just going to change it as if the person did it yesterday. Then for Think C, it also has a notebook paper practice, and you're going to write a sentence in answer to each of the following questions. Use the word in dark type in your answer. Okay, so you are going to answer these questions using the bold words. Might sound tricky, but here's an example. Number 1 says, have you ever lain on the ground? So remember, you have to use both of these words. So you would write, I have lain on the ground. 2 says, did your balloon burst? You would write, my balloon did burst. So you're just answering the questions, making sure that you include the bold letters. I encourage you to go back and re-watch the directions for Think B and Think C to get a better understanding. And here is just a little exercise to review what we've learned, and it says, look closely. Writers need to use exact and vivid words. It is especially important that we use good, strong verbs, verbs that give lively and precise images. Use verbs that give more precise pictures than general verbs do. A general verb would be move, but a lively verb would be lurch. Which of the words snivel, sob, whimper, cry, and wail best describes the sound of each of the following? A lost child, a complaining baby, a sick puppy, a coward making a show of crying? So you don't have to write this, but just kind of think about it. This would be something we would discuss in class. So you're just going to decide which of these words would make more sense with these, but just think about it. No writing necessary. Number 2 says, which of the words soar, dart, fly, flutter, and hover best describes each of these motions? A falling leaf, a kite in good wind, a helicopter watching traffic, a child playing tag. So which of these words would make the most sense with these examples here? And for number 3 says, which of the words stammer, whisper, roar, say, and shriek best describes each of these sounds? A secretive conversation, a frightened person trying to talk, a cheering crowd, a lady who finds a mouse in a drawer. So just something to think about so that you can become a better creative writer later on. And here for our spelling assignment for Friday, we have our very first proofreading exercise. So normally we would do this all together in class with all of us helping to correct this essay. But since you have to do it on your own, I'm going to help you better understand what these proofreading marks mean and what to do as you read this passage, which I will read with you. So there are mistakes in this passage, and we are going to edit it or help correct it by using these marks. They're called proofreading marks. So in addition to learning these, our directions say, Chad is a new tour guide at Windy Cave. He wrote descriptive notes about what he should say to the tourists. Use the proofreading marks to identify mistakes in his notes. Correctly write the misspelled words. So keep in mind that these blanks down here will be for words that are spelled incorrectly. So you will be writing the correct words down here when you find one that's incorrect. And I will give an example or two as I read. So we are going to circle the misspellings. That means every time we see a misspelled word, we will circle it. This mark means to make a capital letter. That means every time that we notice a letter that should be capitalized, for example, like at the beginning of a sentence, we would draw 3 lines under the lowercase letter. If we notice that a sentence is missing a period, we will add one and then circle it. If we notice there's an extra word, you will use this little scribble to delete the word. If a sentence is missing a word, you would draw this little arrow, this little point, and add the word that it's missing right under it. This slash is to make a small letter. So if you notice that there is a word that is capitalized that should not be capitalized, you would draw a slash through it. And if you notice that there is an area in the essay that should be made into a new paragraph because it is discussing a new idea, then you would write this symbol to make sure that they correct and make a new paragraph, and that they would indent it. So an example is here. When you start a new paragraph, you indent it, which means you include this space. If it's missing this space, you would write this symbol. So I'm not going to give you all of the answers, but I will give you some hints as we read. So it says, my tour guide notes. Good morning and welcome to Windy Cave. My name is Chad. Remember that people's names should begin with a capital letter. So let's use our first symbol. So we would draw the 3 lines under the C because Chad should be capitalized. So that's an example of our editing. And I am your tour guide today. Please listen carefully and stay together as I will be explaining interesting facts about the cavern. Before we enter, let me tell you about the cave's entrance. The original opening to the cave was a sinkhole, which 2 boys discovered one afternoon in the late 1800s. The original entrance has not been intact since it was widened and steps were built to allow tourists easy access into the cave. Please be careful as we descend down the 96 steps into the largest chamber in this cave, the Grand Ballroom. This is a limestone cave. As water above ground seeps into the soil, it collects acid from limestone. Over a period of time, the acidic water dissolves the limestone in the ground, creating caves. The beautiful formations you see on the ceiling are known as stalactites, and the ones on the ground are known as stalagmites. These beautiful structures are also formed by the acidic water that seeps through the ground. As water continues seeping through the ground, these structures keep growing. Sometimes stalactites and stalagmites meet and columns are formed. This next room is called the Hall of Giants, since giant pillars have formed from the continual flow water. The last section of the cave on today's tour is the bat room. Bats are known to live in caves. Over in the corner you can see several bats asleep and their bat droppings underneath them. Bat droppings are called guano and were once collected and sold to use in gunpowder and fertilizer. It was a pleasure being your tour guide today. I hope you will join us sometime for our new lantern tours held each Saturday evening. So I noticed quite a few mistakes and quite a few misspelled words. So you're going to take a look at your words in your list, and as usual, if you have a hard time reading cursive, you can take a look at your printed words and decide which are misspelled, because you have to write all 9 down here. And you may have noticed a few words that are capitalized that shouldn't be capitalized, words that are double. So just pay careful attention and use these marks the best you can to correct this essay. So here we have our history read along for Friday. So we have completed 2.1 and now we are starting on 2.2. And here we go. It says Sumer, a civilization of southern Mesopotamia. Surroundings. To the north of Mesopotamia are mountains, the most famous of which is Mount Ararat. In Genesis, God tells us that Noah's Ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. The mountain we call Mount Ararat today may be the very mountain upon which Noah's Ark came to rest. Directly south lies the Persian Gulf, the land. In the northern part of Mesopotamia, where the mountains are high, there is some rain and the weather is cool. In the south, the land is very flat and dry. There is little to no rain in this area, and the temperature sometimes reaches as high as 120 degrees to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet some of the earliest known civilizations were located in southern Mesopotamia. A civilization is a country or a people who have developed to a great extent the natural abilities that God has given to. So we have a little map here that you might have to look back on. So remember this map, but let's continue to man. So remember to take note in your memory of the underlined phrases, because usually there will be questions that will ask you to look for answers, and usually they are underlined. So here we continue. It says, people who make good use of their God-given abilities such as talking, thinking, reading, writing, inventing, discovering, treating people kindly, enjoying art and music, and worshiping God are said to be civilized. One of these civilizations was in the land of Sumer. The Sumerians and their work. The people of Sumer were called Sumerians. They were the descendants of the people who stayed in the area of the Tower of Babel after God confused the languages. One of their cities, Babylon, was probably named after Babel. The Sumerians and the other groups may have lived in caves or crude shelters for a while after the flood until they could build homes, but soon they had a well-developed way of life. The Sumerians were an intelligent people who worked tirelessly to find better ways of living. They became skillful at their jobs and were very inventive. Their hard work made Sumer a wealthy and impressive area. Farmers. The main occupation in Sumer was farming. Farmers in Sumer grew wheat, barley, vegetables, dates, and figs. Sumer was located in the southern part of Mesopotamia, where land was very hot and dry. Irrigation, or supplying land with water by means of ditches, channels, or sprinklers, was extremely important to the Sumerian way of life. The Sumerians dug a system of ditches from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to make the water flow from the rivers to their thirsty lands. Without irrigation, most of Sumer would have been a dry wasteland, unable to grow food for all of its people. As time passed, the Sumerians made their irrigation canals wider and larger in order to produce more crops. Sumer became a wealthy area in the Fertile Crescent, but irrigation brought troubles as well as wealth. Many wars were fought over who had the right to build or use certain canals. Herdsmen or shepherds. Some Sumerians were herdsmen or shepherds, caring for large groups of animals. They raised animals such as sheep, goats, donkeys, and some oxen that could stand a hot, dry climate. The sheep provided wool as well as meat. Goats provided milk and meat. Donkeys were needed to carry heavy loads. When the plow was invented, the Sumerians began raising oxen to pull their plows. Skilled workers. Many Sumerians were skilled workers. Some made cloth from wool. Some worked at making armor, spears, swords, and chariots for their soldiers. There were some who worked with astronomy, medicine, and law. Others were skilled craftsmen, such as sculptors, men who made statues of people and the gods they worshipped. Priests led the people in the worship of many false gods. There were metalsmiths, men who worked with gold, silver, copper, and bronze. And of course, there were soldiers for the army. Inventions from Sumer. Writing. History owes much to the Sumerians, for as far as we know, they were the first people after the flood who developed and used writing. No one knows for sure if man used writing before the flood. At first, their writing looked more like pictures of what the writer was trying to represent, called pictographs. Gradually, their writing became wedge-shaped, each mark standing for a syllable of a word. This form of writing became known as cuneiform. With a reed or with a sharp instrument, the writers made their marks on a smooth piece of soft clay. If they wanted to keep their writing as a record, they baked the clay until it was hard. In this way, they kept permanent written records, thousands of which have been found by modern-day archaeologists, or people who dig up and study the remains of ancient civilizations. Among these bills, tax records, and records of work that was accomplished by individuals. The Sumerians were quite amazing in their orderly way of conducting business. Many poems and stories were also written on these baked pieces of clay. Some of the writings were about creation and the flood. However, these Sumerian writings included many legends along with some Bible truth. The wheel. Another invention credited to the Sumerians was the wheel. They were the first people known to use it. We are so used to seeing wheels today on our cars, trains, and buses, as well as in the workings of clocks and other machines, that it is hard to imagine what life must have been like without wheels. For the armies of Sumer, the invention of the wheel meant building chariots for war. For builders and farmers, the wheel meant being able to move heavy loads. So for your comprehension check 2B, all of your answers will be found in the passage that was just read. And the questions are, what is civilization? What city was probably named after Babel? Name 2 important Sumerian inventions. What was the early form of Sumerian writing called? The later form. What do archaeologists do?